everyone, my name is Maxine Telfer. I'm the founder, managing director, consultant for Oddmex Inc., a training, research, placements, consulting company located in Mississauga, Ontario. We do programs for national, municipality, international clientele, and of course, newcomers, people who are incarcerated. Today, we're going to be speaking with a group of professionals who have worked with newcomers, people in Correctional Service Canada, community, the health sector, faith-based organization, and all other areas. We look mostly at unconscious bias. I'd like to read a little excerpts from behind the ethnocultural door that the offenders say themselves. We do time differently because our charges and the reason for incarceration are different from those of the whites and Aboriginal women. We struggle, smuggle drugs, petty theft, and other non-violent crimes. South Asian women, some family stories are sacred. However, to get us through these times, we rely on each other. We pull on our feelings, our inner strength, music, food, doing the hair, among all the other aspects.
Well, a culturally sensitivity rehabilitation for me would need to first of all recognize that culture plays an important part. Ethnicity plays an important part. Belief systems play an important part in any rehabilitation. So to get there, whoever is doing the rehabilitation would have to have that knowledge and that education and that training. And therefore, it is easy to look at someone on the outside and to make certain determinations of who they are supposed to be. If they're from the Caribbean, you have certain preconceived notions. Some people do.
Do you believe that without this knowledge, that then builds some kind of wall between the ethnocultural offender and rehabilitation?
Yes, that is a big barrier, because then the person would be coming with these, and I go back to it, preconceived notions of what they believe the offender is or ought to be. So no matter what the offender will do, say, behave, act, it is with that preconceived bias, that lens of preconception and bias, and that offender can never do anything right. And even language. So I go back to my roots, the Caribbean. Some accents are presumed to be an aggressive accent. It's not just an accent. So the Jamaican accent, for example, if you don't understand and you're not educated, and it's not even just education, it's exposure, you will hear or can assume that someone speaking in patois is being aggressive.
Okay, if I could look at it from the perspective, correction services is really to aid these inmates in changing their behavior. So change behavior and attitude so they can be rehabilitated, and when they leave the institution they fit back into society. Okay. There's racial barrier, there's systematic barrier, and there is inequality barrier within the system. There are language barrier, religious barriers. There's a large variety of barriers that exist within the institution.
Now, you've done work in the institution for
quite
some time. So,
yes.
So in your experience, what do you see? What were some of the these barriers? Because you talked about racial barriers, you talked about language barriers, which is pretty, and everything that happens in an institution is legal. So language barrier is a very serious barrier, especially in a legal proceeding. Yes. What are some of the examples of some of these barriers that you've seen, if you could share it with us?
Okay, my experience in working in the institution in providing ethnocultural training within Ontario and the Prairie region, there's a disparity. For example, in the Prairie region, I was told that because they don't have a large percentage of blacks in that area, they don't know how to provide that service effectively. one of the correctional officer came to Ontario to the Women Institution, and when she came back, she was in one of my sessions, and she said, Norma, we don't know how to provide the service here in the prairie because we don't have that large percentage, and there's language and cultural barriers.
As we speak about systemic racism and ethnoculturalism, which is a enshrined convention in the Charter of Rights and Freedom, we have to continue remembering that not only those who have been incarcerated have a right to their cultural accommodation, religious accommodation, and the right to not to be discriminated and to be treated with dignity and respect. But the work continues. Even as we are observing the Day for Truth and Reconciliation, we are reminded that not only Indigenous but BIPOC communities inside the institutions and outside continue to face systemic racism, and the work that everyone is playing an important part in making that go away. One of the things I could say is that I have been able to assist the inmates to reintegrate, including those who are eligible for deportation to their own countries. And it's not an easy task at times, finding information from their embassy to the border services, to lawyers that could assist them. And simple things like whilst they're waiting deportation in the provincial jail or detention center, or even the halfway house, they need assistance. I have a good example recently of one Muslim brother, originally from Sri Lanka. He was for deportation, and something as simple as when he was transferred from the federal prison where I work to the provincial detention center, he couldn't get his prayer mat, his timetable for prayers, his halal food. For it was fasting time, he couldn't get halal food to break his fast. It may sound simple, but for him, he just accepted the faith, and he didn't want to give up his faith for anything. So he continued to basically fast it out, pray in a direction which he has no idea if it's correct, and just gauge the timing until he was finally intervened. An officer, a manager intervened and got him his halal food. And then later on, I got in touch with the chaplain to give him his prayer timetable and his prayer mat. And eventually, when he came out, I was able to provide him services at the halfway house, like his prayer timetable, prayer mat.
Us that feel this double consciousness, we have to, and that builds a divide and conquer within even the carceral spaces, because I'll tell you, that makes the girls like me that came here when we were younger, we will gravitate to the other girls that came from the islands, any islands, when they came to Canada at a certain age. So Canada informed all of their beings, will naturally gravitate to each other. And then there is the women that would I don't like the word deportee because I don't believe that anyone is illegal. However, you will have the women from Trinidad, Guyana, Jamaica that are deportable, and they will form their own cliques within a clique. And so this divide and conquer sort of narrative, it takes over this prison lifestyle, because it is a lifestyle. This incarceral lifestyle is different than a pro-social lifestyle, because we have to navigate, because there are no cultural appropriate programs. Most of the core programs are directed towards drug addicts and alcoholics. And I'll tell you the truth, I'll be very honest with you. Even if we might do a little puff puff and a little drink once in a while, we do not fall under that category. The majority of Black women, I'm speaking on the Black woman part now, we do not usually have a substance abuse issue, but that is part of our core program that CSC needs to work on. And ironically, we need to not only take these classes, but pass these classes in order to have the opportunity to go before the National Parole Board of Canada. There are levels of community, there are different types of community. We are all part of this community. At the end of the day, we are all interconnected, and that's the piece that's missing. We're all interconnected. So representation, I mean in terms of judges, I mean in terms of people that look like us on the National Parole Board of Canada. I mean lawyers, I mean social workers, parole officers. Like, can I go on? Can I really, really go on? I mean, as basic as teachers, as basic as nurses, as basic as doctors. Can I go on? Can I go on? We need representation. When I was physically on the premises of Grand Valley, the only volunteers I saw besides you, your mother, Habib, was usually, and I know their intentions are good. I know usually it's good. Older white woman of a Christian faith. I never saw the Jamaican Canadian Center there. I'm born in Trinidad, and I don't know of any Trinidadian collective or anything that has their tentacles, into such a space, because we're represented. We are well represented from every crease and crevice in the world. There's someone in the community for us, but how we mobilize and the level of community, sometimes it's because we don't know that we can make a difference. Sometimes systemically, they fight us. And sometimes our own community is not willing to take on such a challenge. So what we need to do is find out which one, kind of, balance it out and see how we can, be of brotherly connections, with our participation, because it's also the level of participation. You can be a micro or a macro. So if you're a micro or macro in anything, that means you can micro initiate, or just by doing nothing, you are part of the problem. So we have to figure out which way we want to navigate to represent bodies that look like us, or equitable, just be equitable, fair across the board, regardless of the BIPOC, regardless of race, economics, regardless of all of those isms and schisms. At the end of the day, we're still human beings. Try to do the best we can for each other.
Today, we've heard from a lawyer, a correctional volunteer, a chaplain, and an offender, each providing their own unique perspective on dealing with the correctional system or the legal system overall. While we did take some time to discuss shortcomings, more importantly, we took time to lay out ideas that will build the foundation for a better, much more culturally sensitive or culturally competent correctional system in the future. Simply put, we've opened up and looked behind the ethnocultural door. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. My name is Andre Green. I'm a co-founder here at Oddmax Inc., and I hope to work with you to build that future. Thank you again.